Welcome to Steve and Dave's 50 years ago this month. This month we're talking about October 1971, the Billboard charts for October 16th, the Hot 100. And once again, it's a fantastic month for at least for people in our age. It's a lot of fun. And before we get started, let me remind you, we have a playlist of videos of the songs that we're going to be talking about. So be sure to check that out. Maybe watch parallel. It's great material, and it might help remind you what we're talking about here.
Absolutely. Now, if I could add to that just real quickly, we always include a reading list each month of. So if you want to sort of dig deeper into the songs or the artists that we talk about, this is a way to do that. And also a reminder that Steve and Dave's is also on Twitter. So Steve and Dave's 1 at Twitter. We're tweeting basically every day about interesting topics from popular culture from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so, again, we really appreciate your comments. And we understand that we have a kind of worldwide following. And so it's great to have you join us as we talk about the hits from October from 1971. So let's just run down a couple of the hits if we could. Dave, you've got we talked about this song last week, but Rod Stewart is at the top of the charts with Maggie May and Reason to Believe. And just a couple thoughts.
It was his first really big hit coming out of the Faces, and established him as a solo artist. Strangely enough, this was Maggie May was the B-side originally. And Reason to Believe, which became the B-side, was originally the single. But yeah, this established Rod Stewart as a solo artist, and rightly so.
It's one of his classics, and there's any question about that. It's on the Mount Rushmore, I guess, of Rod Stewart songs. At number 2 are those Crazy Kids from Downey, California. It's Richard and Karen Carpenter with Superstar and Bless the Beasts and the Children. Superstar is a song written by Delaney and Bonnie. They got some help from the great Leon Russell from an idea that was suggested to them by Rita Coolidge. And Rita Coolidge's initial suggestion was that they write a song about groupies. And in fact, that was the original title, I believe, of the song was Groupie. And it's a peculiar song, particularly coming from the Carpenters. Delaney and Bonnie and Leon Russell, they wrote this tune about a groupie who is losing herself with this group. She's becoming enraptured, and there is a fairly racy kind of second verse, which Richard Carpenter completely rewrote. And so the song, as the Carpenters present it, is relatively vanilla given the topic.
Have you seen that second verse? Have you read it?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I have not.
I haven't. No, I haven't. I haven't either. I've only heard tale of it. But again, as you think about the song, it's so it's so on the money. For this era in particular, this was the era of the groupie, particularly young women throwing themselves at rock stars. That it's again as it's presented by the Carpenters, particularly Karen Carpenter. It's kind of creepy. I mean, just to be blunt, it's just kind of creepy.
Well, I would be hesitant to call the singer of the song a groupie. This was a woman who probably went to a concert, went backstage, got to meet the star of her dreams, and go to bed with him. We assume that happened, and she imagines this is the beginning of a love affair. Now, I would say yes. Most groupies were not in it for love. Most groupies were not about a person. They wanted to be with the band. They wanted to be part of that scene, and it's yes, personal relationships came out of that, which were more or less ethereal, but I don't think most of them were in it for love. If you listen to the most famous groupies from that time, it's certainly not how it ever started off. I'm in love with so and so, and I want to be with him.
I wouldn't disagree really with any of that. But as Richard Carpenter tried to kind of recraft the song in a way that would seem appropriate for them to record it and for Karen to sing it, I think some of that was kind of left out a bit. It's, like all Carpenter songs, it's well arranged. There's a certain kind of craftsmanship in terms of the recording. Like with most of the Carpenters tunes, the Wrecking Crew participates. I wanted just to give a shout out to the late Earl Dumler on oboe. Joe Osborne's on bass. Of course, then the legendary Hal Blaine is on drums. This is a song that purportedly took but one take. At least the vocals took but one take.
Wow.
And so this is, one of those kind of great kind of studio performances. I like to say something about the flip side of the song.
Yeah.
And maybe this means more to you than it does to me, but certainly 50 years ago, Bless the Beasts and the Children was a film that was of some note.
A book adaptation.
And a book adaptation, and was really, I think, a fairly thoughtful piece, and was one of those films that I think had a kind of reputation as a kind of thoughtful, almost a kind of heavy book and then heavy film. It, I think, has largely disappeared from the cultural conversation. But this was a big deal in 1971, the fall of 1971, directed by the great Stanley Kramer. It was a film about a group of boys, kind of a troubled group of boys who were sent to a summer camp, where adjacent to the camp, then there was a herd of bison, I guess. And the bison, there is a lot of interplay between the boys and this herd. The bison herd is being thinned, cruelly thinned, and the boys take it upon themselves to set the bison free, and which doesn't exactly work out. But the film and the book and the film sort of operate on a number of levels, and was the kind of piece that a lot of people took as speaking for the era, right? That there were things here to be interpreted, to be thought of, given what was happening in the country. Dave, you have I'm largely, I remember this years ago, but I'm not intimately familiar with either the film or the book.
Well, I read the book, and it was really an excellent book. And I don't know why I never saw the film, but I can highly recommend the book. And I love this song. It just, it kind of brings the whole thing to the point. There are people or creatures in the world who are powerless, and because they are powerless, they are victims.
Yeah,
and that's kind of what it's all about.
I have to say that that the idea that the idea of bless the beasts and the children, this was actually kind of a potent kind of idea in the era. I remember this being on posters throughout the 70s, that there was a lot of cultural resonance with this particular film and book. A lot of cultural resonance. I just think that this was it's one of those things that you had to experience. What's fascinating to me is that it has just vanished. There's no real sense of this whatsoever. But in the fall of 1971, this was an enormously important film. And it was, the fact that the Carpenters were singing the theme to it, certainly added to it as well. It was a big event in this era. So,
strangely enough, my kids have discovered Bless the Beast and the Children, the book for themselves without any advice.
Right?
And I'm not sure how that happened, but until that happened, I would have completely agreed with you. I have seen no evidence that it has had any lasting impact on the culture.
Yeah, I well, that's fascinating to hear that they've discovered it. Again, this was an enormous kind of cultural kind of moment, kind of event. All right, so there at number 2, you have Superstar and Bless the Beast and the Children from the Carpenters. Well, if it's the early 1970s and we're talking about pop charts, you got to be talking about the Osmonds, right? And so at number 3, in October of 71, it's those crazy Osmond Brothers with Yo-Yo.
Yo-Yo was released as a single September 4th, 1971, and it peaked at number 3 in the Billboard Hot 100. Now this was the first single off of their 3rd album, Phase 3, and Phase 3 came out in 1972, but the single was released beforehand. So Phase 3, 3rd album, what would be the first 2 phases? Steve, what do you think? What are we talking about here?
We talking about the life cycles? Are we talking about maturation? So you have like infancy and perhaps childhood or something along those lines?
All right. So, and for the Osmonds, what was their childhood like?
Well, they were stage kids, right? They were
stage kids.
They were performers from the very beginning.
Andy Williams show staples, right?
For at least a decade, right? Before they yeah, right.
So Phase 2.
Well, maybe I don't know. Is it getting the recording contract? I don't know. I'm not sure. What
yeah, Teen Idols, the bubblegum pantheon.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And that's certainly distinct from what they were doing in the 60s.
That's right. No, it certainly was. Although I'm starting to already kind of laugh a little bit thinking about what Phase 3 must mean. But go ahead.
All right. Well, what do you think Phase 3?
Oh God. Oh well, then this is their step into again kind of mature recording artists. This is doing their own thing or something.
Yeah, and it is doing their own thing. Most of the songs on this album were written by Osmonds, and
although not this one, but
they're trying to go in a more rock group direction, not bubblegum pop, but more rocky. And songs like Down by the Lazy River give that some credits, I think. But Yo-Yo was the first single from Phase 3. It was certified gold November 17th, 1971, the single, of course. Now, the song was written by Joe South, who was a singer and a guitarist, a sideman in a lot of things. He played bass guitar on Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde. He was responsible for the classic tremolo guitar intro on Aretha Franklin's Chain of Fools, played electric guitar on Simon and Garfunkel's Sound of Silence.
Yeah.
So he was a well occupied session player. But in addition to that, he was also a songwriter, and best known for his 2 songs, The Games People Play, probably based on the Eric Byrne book of the same name, which was a top nonfiction title back in the time, which it won the Grammy Award for Best Contemporary Song and the Grammy Award for the Song of the Year.
It was a huge thing. Yeah.
It was huge. And then he also wrote Rose Garden
Yeah.
for Lynn Anderson. And she won
yeah.
won a Grammy Award for her vocals. And he earned 2 Grammy nominations, Best Country Song and Best Song of the Year, for that one as well. So these are the songs he's actually known for. But Yo-Yo, he also wrote Yo-Yo, and it's a song that that big Osmond fans are familiar with.
Sure. It's, you know, Joe South was everything the Osmonds wanted to be. I mean, he had credibility. He was admired by his peers. He was a substantive. He was a substantive artist. So this is the phase. This is the third phase that they're reaching toward. Interestingly.
Yeah, interestingly enough, this song was also produced by Rick Hall.
Is that right?
Yes, Fame Studio, Muscle Shoals.
I'll be darned.
And he produced both of their earlier albums, but he only produced 2 cuts from this album, and this was one of them. And if you're going to be a rock star, there are worse people to have produced.
Oh, that's right. Oh, you're definitely right there. No, it's
the Swampers were already gone. They had left Fame Studio in 1968, so they weren't involved in any of the Osmond productions. But nevertheless, Rick Hall was responsible for producing this one.
You know, give them credit. They did give it a good go, the Osmonds. It's easy enough to sort of poke fun at them for their kind of lily white image and all of that. I mean, there's, if you look at any clip from the 70s of the Osmonds performing, they always give you a sense that they're trying just a little too hard.
The playlist is going to have their performance of Yo-Yo from the Flip Wilson show.
Of course.
Black jumpsuits, the whole bit.
Oh God, yeah. So
this was his favorite choreographed song. So it's worth checking out. Definitely worth checking
out. They threw everything they had into this. I mean, at this era, the Osmonds were, I mean, they were touring, recording. I mean, and as you'll see, even the stage performance, you know, they're throwing everything into it. It is amazing. The amount.
They've got their own cartoon series. They're going to have their own evening variety series. Well, Donny and Marie anyway. And they're on. Well, they've been on television since like the mid '60s, right? So they're
yes, they have
no strangers to that medium. Can make fun of the Osmonds, but they're just going to laugh all the way to the bank, right? Because
that's true.
That's true. They just made gobs of money.
But right, they did make gobs of money. But here's the thing that they never got. They never got the respect of their peers. They just never, and they never. I mean, they never were Joe South. I mean, they just never were. And you wonder. You know, when you read more about the Osmonds, and particularly the Osmonds, not Donny Osmond, but, you know, Merrill and Wayne, and they were really serious about this. And I think that the whole notion of phase 3, which is sort of, it seems laughable 50 years in the rearview mirror, but they were definitely pushing this.
Down by Lazy River, Crazy Horses, they had some rock credibility. I mean, limited, yes, but they put out a couple of rock songs. They did.
Yes, they did. They did put out a couple rock songs, and a couple of them actually kind of hold up. But they never could. They could never overcome. They never could overcome their image. And I don't know in the long run if they necessarily wanted to, right? Because, you know, they are. I mean, a big part of they are devout Mormon people. Always have been. Much of their lifestyle was incompatible with the rock world, and then and now, and so they never really got to phase 3, but they sure as heck gave it a try,
which is admirable in itself.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with you completely.
And it's interesting because we're going to be talking about Cher a little bit later, and this is something that really has eaten at her for decades.
Oh, yes, it has.
Right. So
Oh.
we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to Cher.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's right. So so at number 3, we have Yo-Yo with the Osmonds. But we'll talk about a couple of, we mentioned these last month, but at number 4 in October of 71, it's Joan Baez's take on the bands, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. Seems, again, it's a peculiar artist for this particular tune. But she's the one that really made it a hit, I guess.
Yeah,
but
it was never a hit for the band.
Never the hit for the band. At number 5, so again, the Osmonds are everywhere. At number 5, we have little Donny Osmond with his version of the Paul Anka Go Away Little Girl. Again, that's at 5. At number 6, Dave, then we have, I guess, what we term, I guess, a one-hit wonder. And that's Lee Michaels. Really fine song. Do You Know What I Mean? And so you talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. And it's strange that he's a one-hit wonder, because apparently he was a very talented guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, the single ranked number 19 on the year-end Hot 100 singles, so it did really well. Reached number 6 and number 4 on the Cashbox Top 100. And this was from his 1971 album. Now, he was recording for A&M, and he had signed with them back in 1967. But this, on his 5th album, which was titled Fifth, was really his first and only big hit, the only hit worth really talking about.
That's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, we were 5 albums deep into his career before he catches anything close to a hit. It's amazing.
Now, Michaels was he could play various instruments. He was well-versed in guitar and things like this, but his primary instrument of choice was the Hammond organ, which was a bit unusual for the time. The organ kind of came into its own in the late 60s and the 70s. But Michaels was one of the first people who was really working with that. In fact, he had a very bare bones stage accompaniment. Usually he would go play with himself on the organ, and he would have a single drummer with him. Most often that was the drummer known as Frosty, Bartholomew Eugene Smith Frost, who was a member of Sweat Hog. And he had a barehanded technique that was said to have inspired John Bonham.
Wow.
So, yes.
So just the organ and the drums. That's very spare.
Drums. Yes, incredible. And that unorthodox approach kind of attracted a following for him in San Francisco, and he got some critical note for that. But he didn't. Apart from this song, he never really achieved commercial success.
No, it's an interesting story, and but a familiar one, right? People who toiled for years and years to get just a kind of taste of success, and then really kind of never to be heard from again. And so it's a fine song, but there you go. It's really the only song that Lee Michaels ever was known for. At number 6, Do You Know What I Mean? At number 7, we have the campy number from Paul and Linda McCartney, Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey. This is, we talked about this last month. McCartney was always writing these kinds of tunes, even when he was in the Beatles, right? These kind of campy, kind of dance hall numbers, almost from another era.
He was, with a possible exception of Ringo, the most whimsical.
Yeah, whimsical. Yeah, I think he probably was. Yeah,
describes this single fairly well.
It is whimsical. I think that McCartney's whimsy drove John Lennon to distraction. many number of times are great number of stories about all that, about songs that ended up on Beatles records that anyway, but here we go. So this is also McCartney getting getting a little bit of traction in his solo career, right? And so we're still only a year or so removed from the dissolution of the Beatles, and the various Beatles now are releasing singles, solo albums and singles. And
but this was from Ram,
this is from Ram.
Yeah.
This is from Ram. Yeah. So at number 8, then we have Stevie Wonders with If You Really Love Me. A couple things about Stevie Wonder. And the 70s is, of course, then really the decade for Stevie Wonder. When we think about Wonder, we think about all these incredible songs and albums from the 70s. He's just kind of...
He and... who am I thinking of? They pulled Motown through the 70s. Just
probably Marvin Gaye.
Marvin Gaye, that's it. Those two basically kept Motown running through that decade.
Well, and to that point, I wouldn't disagree at all. I think that's absolutely right. To that point, however, Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye were oftentimes compared. And in the early 1970s, the comparison really leaned in the direction of Gaye, because this is Marvin Gaye, of course, has just released his What's Going On LP, this magnificent kind of magnum opus kind of thing. This particular song comes from an album from Stevie Wonder, Where I'm From. And a lot of people were trying to compare what Marvin Gaye was doing, what Stevie Wonder was doing. And Stevie Wonder just, it was a pop LP. It's interesting, of course, that Stevie Wonder takes the leap as an artist shortly thereafter. This is, I guess, a couple things about Wonder, though, at this point, right? So this comes from, again, Where I'm From. That's his 13th studio album. Stevie Wonder is 21 years old. He's a kid, right? He's a kid, but he's starting to grab hold of his career. This will be the last album that he'll record with the Funk Brothers, the Motown house band. Really, from here on, certainly in the 70s at least, Wonder records, almost puts down the tracks himself, plays a variety of instruments, and handles a lot of the production duties himself. He really becomes almost a kind of self-contained artist following all of this. This is very much a kind of transitional moment for him.
Well, right, and after renegotiating his contract with Motown, which was also a critical moment, Berry Gordy made the right decision to do that, and it was basically was about artistic freedom.
Well, I think that's it. I think it basically was it. That's what it boiled down to. I mean, what's interesting about the Wonder-Berry relationship is that there's clearly a kind of commercial kind of thing happening there, but there's also, I think Berry Gordy thought of himself as a kind of guardian of Stevie Wonder. In fact, I think it's pretty clear. And that's a very awkward transition, right? And so once that begins to kind of dissolve the kind of familial relationship, a lot of stuff is left bare. This is a very difficult era for Motown. We talked about this in the Behind the Curtain with Berry Gordy, but when Motown, right, migrates from Detroit to LA, some artists follow him, some artists famously don't, including Marvin Gaye. But there is this just moment where Motown is changing. And Stevie Wonder was raised inside Motown. But as a young man, he wants his independence. It's a very tumultuous time in Gordy's life, in the history of Motown, and even to some degree with Wonder and his artistry.
And this is also a time when Gordy is removing himself from the active. He was a very, very hands-on.
No question.
But he has recentered his sphere of activity to Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's right.
Is more interested in movies and stuff now. And the Motown Records still exist. It's still an entity, but he is no longer the guy behind it who is making the big decisions and is watching what's going on.
That's precisely
His
right.
attention is elsewhere. So
That's precisely right. And so we have Stevie Wonder, again, sort of a transitional moment in his career, and kind of a transitional record to some degree with If You Really Love Me. At number 9 is a group called the Stampeders, the Canadian group. And the Stampeders have a fairly sizable here with Sweet City Woman, which is number 9 this week. Sweet City Woman is an unusual song in that it features a banjo. There aren't many banjos in pop music in this era, really any era. But the Stampeders are a beloved band in Canada, beloved. Really, I think by some measure, even a kind of an important band. Well, they only get to the top 10 once in the United States with Sweet City Woman, and they only chart one other time a couple years later with their take on Ray Charles. What is the Ray Charles song they hit? Oh yeah, Hit the Road Jack.
Hit the Road Jack.
They are a major pop force in Canada. They put 7 top 10 songs in Canada, and I think part of the reason why is that the Canada was always very nurturing of Canadian artists, and the Canadian government ensured that there was a kind of cultural protectionism when it came to Canadian radio. Canadian radio, for example, was required by law to broadcast a third of the music would be from Canadian artists. Now, how you would define Canadian would be, I think there's some detail in that. But what this allowed to have happen in Canada was that groups could have a Canadian career. Obviously, the United States is this kind of hegemonic force to the south, and culturally, there's this kind of, wave. But Canada always really pushed back at that. And what you see in the Canadian recording industry is that you have decidedly Canadian acts that actually have careers. Stampeders are one of them. All right. The Stampeders don't mean anything in the United States. But the version of the Stampeders still tours in Canada, in the oldie circuit, whatnot. And in part, the Stampeders have a career because Canadian radio nurtured Canadian acts. I think it's a very interesting approach, an approach that you see in some other countries. France famously did something similar, but given the proximity of Canada to the United States, the fact that there were any Canadian acts sort of finding any kind of space is a fascinating one. But I won't belabor this anymore. But if you go to look at the Canadian Grammy, the Juno Award, if you look at Juno Award winners, you'll see some familiar names, but you'll see a lot of unfamiliar names as well. If you're not Canadian. But that's part of the reason why, right? Because Canada always tried to protect their artists, give them a space.
Well, arguably, that space made it possible for some of the acts that we have come to know and love.
That's true. That's true.
To export what they had out of Canada and get an international following, which they may never have accomplished if they had not had that support up front.
I think that's a fair point. I really do. It's just so. The Stampeders are again essentially kind of one-hit wonder in the United States, but they're an interesting example of a Canadian band that was able to kind of have a career, largely because the Canadian government insisted that radio stations, in terms of having their license, played a lot of Canadian music, and there we have it. I think a very kind of effective way of kind of going about it. Strategically, I think there's a certain kind of brilliance, and it's certainly also an acknowledgement that if you didn't have something like that, Canadian radio and American radio would have been the same,
right.
Identical. But Canada didn't want that. So you had the Stampeders at number 9 with a very appealing, appealing. It's ridiculously infectious song, Sweet City Woman, with banjo of all things. So here we go. And so we'll buckle ourselves in, because at number 10 is Cher with Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves. Fascinating.
Show. Yeah. Well, this was from her 7th solo studio album, Cher. But it was released after her last top 10 hit. you better sit down, kids. And Sonny and Cher, they were struggling as an act. They were not getting hits. They were kind of on a circuit tour through the States, and the audiences didn't appreciate them quite like they should have, perhaps. So they spent a lot of their stage time just, cracking up, kind of developing a little comedy routine on the side.
Right.
And this was actually then discovered by a TV executive, and this is how the Sonny and Cher show came to be. And that started in August of 1971. Sorry, that was July 71, and this solo hit for Cher came out in August. So the producer, one Snuff Garrett, who was, we're going to have to talk about him at some
legend.
point.
Yeah,
right, in Behind the Curtain, because he really is a legend. Did so much for so many acts, and he moved into a new house, and he said his neighbors came over at one point and said, we haven't had a hit for a while. We'd like for you to maybe take control. And control up until that point had been Sonny Bono, and he just wasn't he wasn't producing hits for them or for her. And so Snuff took over, and he actually hired Bob Stone to write this song for Cher, to kind of dealing with this, I think, this undefined ethnic thing that Cher has going, right? So you have this, and that was the beginning of a run of songs like Half Breed and Dark Lady, and all of this playing into this this gypsy thing, and this, as I said, this undefined ethnicity. But this became a huge song. One of her songs, and it was responsible for her comeback. And whether the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour maybe open people up to say, oh yeah, they're still around. And if that opened things up for her reception on the pop charts, is a question that we'll probably never be able to answer. But
it's fascinating.
At the time of its release, Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves was the biggest selling single in the history of MCA Records.
Right.
It earned Cher her first Grammy Award nomination for the Best Female Pop Vocal. It became her first solo #1 single on the Billboard Hot 100. So it does reach #1.
Right.
And it actually kicks Maggie May from the #1 slot. So let's talk a little.
Yeah.
Cher has always had a very problematic relationship with this song and these songs. The songs that that revived her career, essentially. Snuff Garrett said, Cher doesn't listen to the songs that I produce for her. And he says, and I don't care, because other people do, and they're the ones who are paying the money.
It's absolutely, she is, famously kind of turned her back on them. She will occasionally perform a medley of them in concert and that kind of thing, but she's never really barely acknowledged their existence. I mean, these songs all have a kind of overwrought quality, a kind of highly dramatic, there's a sort of a persona being played out, all this kind of thing. And they're little kind of dramatic vignettes, 3-minute vignettes, but were massively popular. I mean, like you're saying, the biggest hit that MCA ever had. And that on top of the great fame that they achieved on the comedy hour, Cher was, and maybe some degree still is, one of the most noteworthy people ever in the United States. I mean, she is, you think about women of the women,
absolute great pop divas of all time. Yeah.
And one of the most notable women of the 20th century in the United States. I mean, for better or worse, I think she is an enormously well-known figure. And I think some people might say influential figure, but she was really important. It's just there's so much though that surrounds Sonny and Cher, you put them together. They of course had a string of hits in the mid 1960s. Sonny is, God bless Sonny Bono. He is, he's the great American dream. Never has someone achieved so much with so little. I mean, he just, he wasn't a particularly talented musician. He wasn't a particularly attractive guy, but, he found a way. And it's clear, it's clear even when you watch clips of the old TV show that everybody's sort of in on the joke, including, I think, Sonny to some degree.
She said, because what they were doing, this shtick that they were doing on the stage was also part of it. She says it's, he was my Costello to my Abbott, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, yes, he was always the butt of the joke, and she was the sophisticated one, and he was okay with that.
He was okay with that, but to the Abbott and Costello point, that relationship was famously dysfunctional off the screen, off the stage, as was Sonny and Cher. And part of the interest in Sonny and Cher as the 70s, we moved from the early 70s to the late 70s or to the mid 70s, is that their relationship is coming apart very publicly. I mean, right. they famously separate and divorce. They're still on the show together. People, and then the show is revived. People can't quite figure out how this all works. But
it was a top 10 show, and they canceled it after 3 seasons because of the divorce.
Yes,
they both did their own shows, and because Cher's show was successful, she was able to say, "Well, I'd like to work with Sonny again." Because professionally, that was the combination that worked well.
That was the combination.
Sonny could be seen as kind of a more benevolent Ike Turner in terms of the dynamics of their relationships. Because he was completely in control, right?
Was 100%.
He took her. Nobody knew her. She came from nowhere. He saw potential there. He took her. He formed her. And he owned everything. He owned the whole bit. And so when she divorced him, she found out she didn't own any of their material. It was all going to him. So she had to completely restructure her existence after that. So yes, a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and this has been, of course, analyzed one side and down the other for decades. I think a benevolent Ike Turner is an interesting comparison. But to their credit, they always managed some measure of civility. They had a deep affection for each other. That is still evident today. If Cher talks about Sonny, it's really quite moving. They were America's kind of first couple that we would see them each week on this show, this highly rated show. They eventually had a child. They became important to the United States. Cher was outlandish. Her costumes, 1 week, it was just, you never knew what you're going to get from Cher. And her songs were, all these, kind of powerful sort of vignettes as well. they were an attraction that middle America just couldn't get enough of. And it's really odd when you think about her career trajectory, right? And the kind of image that Cher has today. But back, oh boy, if it's 1971, this is middle America, turn on the TV, there's Sonny and Cher. And, Cher's got some sort of outlandish outfit on, and she's going to sing Half Breed or whatever. But man, we just couldn't get enough of them.
It was an incredibly popular combination. Cher became an icon. She became an icon because she had this career boost a few years after their career as Sonny and Cher was essentially dead.
Right.
And she just really hated what she was doing. She wanted to be Bruce Springsteen. She wanted to be Joni Mitchell.
She did.
She wanted to have music like the Eagles.
Yes.
And nobody wanted to hear her sing that stuff. She tried numerous times. She was also down with the Swampers and trying to get rock credibility, but it just never worked. And the things that people loved her for were the things that she hated. Just real quickly, Billboard magazine in 2017, one of their authors, Rob Tannenbaum, said that Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves was the most important song of the 20th century. This was his claim. He said, all right. He had talked to her shortly before that, and quote, when I asked her in her Las Vegas villa if I could convince her that Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves is one of the greatest pop songs of the last century, which it is, she stares blankly at me the way she once did at Bono. No, she says decisively. He's not going to convince her, but his argument, this is from the article that he wrote, but Gypsies isn't just a highlight of Cher's catalog. It is one of the most majestic pop hits ever made. A tale recounted at breakneck speed of sexual hypocrisy and consequences, with a bonus undertow of female and class consciousness.
Yes.
It's voyeuristic like a pulp novel.
Yes.
Exploitative like a Lifetime movie, and redeemed by the brash confidence Cher gives the narrator. Cher's, so that's from the article, Cher's Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves, why it's one of the 20th century's greatest songs. Now, I think that's what he's saying there makes a lot of sense. I don't think it's anywhere close to one of the greatest songs of the 20th century, but
nor do I.
I guess in the end, that's a matter of taste.
Agreed, but he's spot on though. I mean, the things that make this song interesting, there's a power there, there's a narration there, there's a complexity there that comes out, right? Cher delivers. I mean, Cher delivers, right? She is this person. She takes on this role, and she's not just singing. She completely immerses herself in it. She's an enormous talent. She's an enormous talent. And the journey with Cher, the American journey with Cher, has lasted, on 6 decades plus, right? It's
she's the only artist to have top 40 hits from the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, and the 10s.
It's
incredible.
It's incredible. Yeah, it's incredible.
Well, just one more thing about Snuff Garrett. We do need to talk more about him at some other point, but he also went to Sonny and said, I have another song for Cher. It's a hit. Sonny read it. He said, it's a piece of shit. She's not going to do it.
Oh,
and so he threw Snuff out. So Snuff went and he got a different singer for it, Vicki Lawrence.
Oh, yes.
The night the lights went out in Georgia.
And
Cher could have just torn that up.
She could have torn it up. Yeah, this is
It
that.
was a huge hit.
It was a huge hit. Yeah, for a young Vicki Lawrence who rises then to a certain degree of stardom as a member of the Carol Burnett show.
Right.
But I mean, you could definitely hear Cher doing that. I mean, Snuff was right. I mean, it absolutely was right. That would have been a perfect song for Cher.
And that was really his talent, is to recognize, okay, this song is a hit. This person needs to do it. That sort of thing. So Interestingly enough, this was the first solo single. This is the first single from the album that was backed by the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah, so. We'll talk more about Cher as we move deeper into the 70s, but I think
definitely, yeah.
She's not just a popular figure, but I think she's an important figure. And I mean, we're not alone in thinking that. Real quickly, you mentioned the Ike and Tina Turner. We should note the Rolling Stone cover for mid-October 1971 is the aforementioned Ike and Tina. And there we go. There is no picture, no publicity picture that I know of Ike Turner where he's not in at least mid-menace. There's always he always has the same kind of look on his face. And when you understand then what Tina Turner was going through, when you read I, Tina, for example, her autobiography and all that, What's Love Got to Do with It, the film, right? There's something unsettling about covers like this, because apparently Ike Turner was like this when the camera was off as well. And so I wanted to show that this is what's going on in mid-October 1971. Ike and Tina Turner.
Yeah, here, if you don't have that background, he looks almost tender here.
Almost. Yeah, almost.
If you do have and as you said, he normally looked just flat out threatening, scary.
Flat out.
There are very, very few pictures of him where he looks less threatening than this. So somehow they were the photographers were probably too scared to give him any sort of direction, because it wouldn't have been that hard to make him look a little bit more likable, a little less.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, it's so either they were too frightened, or he didn't take to the direction, or who knows. But or maybe I don't know. It's a peculiar thing, but it is consistent. Any picture of Ike Turner from this era, he has this menacing look on his face for sure.
If you're his photographer, all you have to say is, "Look, Mike, look at the camera. I am one of Tina's backup singers.
Oh, come on.
Flirt with me."
Come on.
So that would have done it. He would have looked a lot less threatening then.
Well, one would assume that would have done it, but I think, like you said a second ago, I think maybe the photographers were a little too frightened to even offer any direction. That's just a guess, but I think you're probably right. Let's cherry pick a little bit. Let's cherry pick among some of the other songs that are making their way up the charts. Let's see at number 13, the majestic Al Green with Tired of Being Alone. You got a couple thoughts about the Reverend Al Green?
Look, Al Green sang a song that I consider to be one of the best soul songs ever. With his let's stay together. Let's stay together.
Absolutely.
It's almost defines what soul can do. This song, I don't even remember it. I don't remember having heard it. It made no impression on me. And when I listened to it preparing for this, I wasn't particularly impressed. Now, Al Green, I know it's like sacrilegious, right? But yeah, it's just it did too much for me. But it did a lot for a lot of other people. It reached number 11 on the Hot 100, Billboard Hot 100, number 7 on the Hot Soul Singles chart, and it was the number 12 song for 1971.
Oh.
All right,
it's a big song. It's a big song, and it's a central song to the Al Green canon. I think that, but again, just so we're clear, it didn't do much for you.
Didn't do much for me. All right. This was released on the 1971 album Al Green Gets Next to You.
Right.
But it was written in late 1968, and it was intended to be released on Green is Blues, the 1969 album.
Yeah.
But problems occurred with the first recording, so it was postponed for production. So what we have here is an altered and perfected, edited version, right? Okay. This was produced and recorded by Willie Mitchell, who was a famous trumpeter, band leader, and producer who ran Royal Studios in Memphis.
Big name in Memphis. Yeah,
he was best known for his High Records label, and basically was responsible for its high watermark in the early 70s, and he had a large stable of popular Memphis soul artists. But Al Green and himself were probably the two that really contributed most to the success of that label. This was mixed by Terry Manning, who had worked
that's familiar.
At Stax Records and Ardent Studios in Memphis. He was a principal part of Stax owner Al Bell's production team for the Staple Singers at Stax, and was responsible for songs like "I'll Take You There." He worked in London at EMI's Abbey Road Studios. He worked for 2 decades with Chris Blackwell at the Compass Point Studios for Island Records.
Island Records, yeah.
In Nassau, Bahamas. So he was a producing and an engineering force.
Absolutely. It's I just was thinking as you were mentioning this, that one of the things that I think is a little undersold is the influence of Memphis in American recording history. People understand Sun Studios, but
Sun Studios, yes.
But it was an incredibly influential place and an extraordinarily vibrant music scene. And there are so many people who grew up in and around Memphis. I was just reading the other day about Booker T. Jones, Booker T. and the MGs. Booker T. was part of the Memphis scene, as were dozens of other people, even somebody like Maurice White, who founded Earth, Wind, and Fire. Memphis was this cauldron of activity, and so completely, I think, undervalued.
Beale Street, is legendary for being kind of this cauldron. And yes, so what Nashville is to country music, Memphis is
that's right.
soul, right?
No question. There's no question. Yeah, it's a fascinating place, and again, its influence, I think, is a little underappreciated, but it's for a variety of reasons, Memphis matters when we talk about popular music. To say nothing of one Elvis Aaron Presley, right? It's extraordinary. Okay, cool. So let's cherry pick a little bit more. At number 14 from the seminal Tapestry album, we have Carole King's "So Far Away." It was actually the B-side to Smackwater Jack. Smackwater Jack was to be the second single released off of Tapestry. And then people discovered, I guess, So Far Away. It's, what more can we say about Carole King and Tapestry? This is in many ways sort of the album, maybe even the album of, well, one of the albums of the decade. I don't think there's any question about that. It's peak Carole King. She benefited from the production help of Lou Adler, who we've talked about a little bit before, but again, Lou Adler was partners with Herb Alpert in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Famously, they went their separate ways, but remain close friends. And when Lou Adler started the Ode label, became an imprint of Albert's A&M Records. This was one of his, probably the most important album ever to appear on Ode. Carole King was already go ahead. Yeah, please.
Adler. I think one of the things that was special about him as a producer is that he had a feel for a groundswell that was going on in the music scene.
Yes.
Which was moving toward artists who could actually perform their own music. Exactly, and Carole King is certainly an example of that. She had a core of musicians that she worked with, and instead of him coming in and saying, all right, you're our artist, come here, we're going to put you in our studio with our session players, he said, all right, you're our artist, you've got your people, go. That's
exactly right.
A lot to his credit.
It isn't to his credit. And at that time, that was a very bold choice. It was a very innovative choice. And many people thought it was a kind of foolish choice, because what was the standard practice was, again, to use these incredible studio musicians, this sort of interchangeable band of players. And why would you do that? Because they'd recorded nothing but hits. I mean, and as we've talked about before in various behind the curtain episodes, not just music, not just popular music, but films, TV, commercials,
everything. Yes.
If you heard anything, any kind of music played in the 1960s, chances are studio musicians, particularly the Wrecking Crew, was behind it. When Adler suggested, listen, you need to work with the people that you want to work with. And if you want to have James Taylor on this record, as of course he famously is, if you want to use somebody like Russ Kunkel, because he's a great player and he's also a friend, you should do that. And so it's very much a kind of personal portrait, and it's very much associated with Laurel Canyon and the singer-songwriter movement. But I think you're absolutely right that Lou Adler sort of allowed Carole King to come to the flower in this way. She was a great performer, a veteran performer by this time, and she certainly had an enormous talent. But she really benefited from this collaboration. And I think it is a collaboration with Lou Adler. And Lou Adler saw something in her and saw something in the experience that he wanted to present to a kind of larger audience. And this changed the way people saw singer-songwriters. This changed the way people saw recording. Tapestry is it's a transitional album in the entire music industry.
It became the top-selling album of all time for a number of years.
That's exactly right. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And of course, Tapestry is now part of the Library of Congress National Recording Registry. So as long as there's a Library of Congress, it will be protected in some way. It's archived, and it is, it is this kind of moment in American popular music that does suggest that there are changes afoot. The 60s, the 60s were the 60s, but the 70s became something entirely different. And the singer-songwriter piece of it was a big part of the 70s, particularly the early 70s. And Carole King was the songwriter's songwriter. And so some degree, the singer in this era. It's just a magnificent album. And of course, this single, what can you say about So Far Away? Emotional distance, physical distance, an incredible song.
I like Smackwater Jack, but seriously, to put this on the B side of that was a mistake.
This is the thing. Yeah. And so I couldn't agree with you more. And so who knows what makes a hit, right? Who knows what makes a hit? But how could anyone, after hearing So Far Away, think, that's the B side? What? It's astounding. It's astounding, but there we go. So we have So Far Away at number 14. Oh goodness. If it's 1971, the Partridge Family's got to be around here someplace. And so good grief. At number 17,
Absolutely.
yet another Partridge Family song. And let me guess, Wes Farrell is involved in some way.
Oh, wow. Good guess.
So here we go. All right, so here we go. So 17, it's I Woke Up and Loved This Morning. Please.
Well,
the Partridge Family.
He shoots, he scores. Wes Farrell produced this song as well. He produced all 8 of their studio albums, so it's a safe guess. By the way, the next Partridge Family song that comes, you're going to be able to talk about. I've done all of them up until now. I think there's going to be 1 or 2 more, and you can do those. I love the Partridge Family. I was a big fan. I wanted to be David Partridge. I wanted to date Laura.
You wanted to date Lori Partridge. You wanted to date Susan Day.
Susan Day. And I even loved Shirley Jones. Well, who didn't love Shirley Jones?
Oh, who didn't?
And I love this song. I think this is a great song. I woke up and loved this morning. Went to sleep with you on my mind. So, interesting thing about this was this was for their 1971 album Sound Machine. Oh, sorry, Sound Magazine. B-side was 24 hours a day, and I don't remember that song, but I knew it back in 1971. I guarantee you.
Yeah.
This peaked at number 13 on the Hot 100 chart. It was written by L. Russell Brown and Irwin Levin. Now, these guys are known principally for being the songwriters for Tony Orlando and Dawn. They wrote Tie a Yellow Ribbon.
Yeah.
They Has Anybody Seen My Sweet Gypsy Rose? Knocked 3 times. And Irwin Levin also co-wrote Candida with other guys, not with L. Russell.
Goodness, I wonder who had the publishing with those, because those were enormous songs.
Enormous, right? Irwin Levin also co-wrote This Diamond Ring. Snuff Garrett made a hit with Gary Lewis.
Gary Lewis, which is Jerry Lewis's son, I think. But yes,
that's right. It was engineered by Bob Kovac, and the album features a lot of the Wrecking Crew guys: Hal Blaine, Mike Melvoin on piano, Larry Knechtel on piano, of course, Dennis Budimir on guitar, Louis Shelton on guitar, Max Bennett on bass, and the Ron Hinkle singers were background for, I think, like every Partridge Family
like
song.
Everyone, yeah.
Right. They include the brothers John and Tom Baller. John Baller did a lot of the arrangements for those background vocals as well. Ron Hinkle, Hicklin himself, and Jackie Ward. They needed a female voice as well. So yes, so they were there as well. It was a standard Partridge Family fare,
right,
and a lot of the usual suspects, right?
I'll confess that I owned Sound Magazine, one of the first albums I ever bought. As actually, I believe it was the second album I ever bought. The first album was John Denver's Rocky Mountain High. But yeah, so the Partridge Family only ran, I believe, 4 seasons on ABC, but for being a relatively short-lived television series, it's taken on sort of a life of its own. They did have a number of hits. It's actually kind of surprising to note. We've talked about a bunch of them, but to note how many songs they put into the top 20 that you couldn't listen to AM radio in 1970, 71, 72 without hearing a lot of Partridge Family. And like you said, Dave,
who would want to? They belonged. They were.
Oh, yeah.
One of my first favorite groups, right up there with the Monkees was my first favorite group.
Of course, yeah.
Three Dog Night and Partridge Family were about neck and neck for me.
Well, I played guitar for a year and a half, 2 years, roughly in this era. And undoubtedly, I was inspired by not Paul McCartney, but probably David Cassidy, if truth be told. And so they were, in their own way, I think, quite influential, at least with younger people. And David Cassidy had this, incredible fame, really a kind of corrosive fame that I don't think served him well throughout his life. But they're just everywhere. But okay, so you got the Partridge Family at 17 with "I Woke Up at 11 This Morning." However, that is like Mozart compared to what we're hearing at 22.
So bitter.
This
Just
is
because you cannot remember Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep from back in the day.
After I heard it, I think that was just some sort of, I just repressed it because for my own health. So so at 22 we have Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep. You're actually going to talk about this from the dynamic duo of Mac and Katie Kissoon. And so what do we need to know about Chirpy Chirpy?
I guess to try to understand your perspective a little bit, in 2006, Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep topped a list of unintentionally creepy songs in The Observer.
Yes.
Because, well, look, what's it about? It's about a child being abandoned by its parents. It's kind of creepy. It's not a little,
just a hit.
It's a song that has really creepy lyrics and a really upbeat, happy sort of tune, and that's strange.
It does.
All right, this was written by Lally Stott, and it was made popular by Middle of the Road, Scottish band, and hit #1 in the UK. That version of the song is one of fewer than 50 singles ever to have sold in excess of 10 million physical copies worldwide. So there you go. This version, released July 1971, was the one that made it on the Billboard charts. The Middle of the Road didn't chart with this in America, but who did chart was the Trinidadian brother and sister duo, Mac and Katie Kissoon. It was released on July 1971. It reached number 20 on the Billboard Hot 100. That's where it topped out. And so it's an upbeat, chipper little creepy song about child abandonment. And it's a lot of fun to listen to, I think. Still, it holds up very well. Middle of the road.
Okay, the phrase holds up very well. The phrase holds up very well cannot be associated with this particular song.
It will be in my jukebox. That's how well.
Lord. Wow. Well, we'll let the viewers decide. Yes. Again, we're always open to comments. And so holds up very well. All right.
I'm going to include both versions though, with the Middle of the Road version as well.
Oh, so, and you should. You definitely should. Just compare them. Suss out the difference. Yeah. So there we. I know you love this song. I know you've always loved this song. We're still.
Love may be a tad strong, but I really like it. Yeah, I do.
And the fact that we're still friends is just remarkable. It's incredible that what things that friendship can overcome.
I'm tolerant. So.
See, there you go. Reversal, 2 points. Let's see. Okay, so we've got a couple more I want to talk about real briefly. One is from the Moody Blues. At number 33, just kind of snaking its way up the charts, is The Story in Your Eyes, a song written by Justin Hayward. The Moody Blues were, I think, a very interesting and important act in the 60s and 1970s. They were more in the United States, I think, an albums act than they were a singles act, but they did have some chart success in the US. This particular song is the last song that the Moodies rely on the Mellotron for. I just want to mention this. The Mellotron is an unusual instrument in that it's a keyboard instrument, but it's actually sort of like a kind of analog computer. Basically, you have these recorded tapes inside the mellotron, which you can activate by pushing buttons and keys. And the mellotron was an important part of popular music in the 1960s. The Beatles famously used the mellotron, and much of Sgt. Pepper. And the Moody's were a big mellotron band as well. Mike Pinder, the keyboardist for the Moody's, was the chief mellotronist, if you will. But they eventually then turned away from the mellotron. Curiously, the mellotron's making a comeback of sorts. But the Moody's were recently inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they are, I think, they're considered a kind of intellectual band in a way that many of their songs had a kind of philosophical bent. I'm not so certain that this one does.
Did you say prog rock?
Prog rockish. Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Prog. Yeah, they do sort of, they do sort of split the difference between sort of prog rock and rock maybe, but yeah, definitely have prog rock chops. And they are, I think, acknowledged in the prog rock community as a prog rock band. This is from their album, Every Good Boy Deserves a Favor, on their own Threshold album, and so their own Threshold label. And so the Moody's were pretty assertive in grabbing a hold of their career early. The Moody's famously, they start off as a kind of British blues band, and they have a big hit, Go Now. This would be mid 60s. And it's definitely a top 10 hit in the United States. And the Moody's at this time feature Denny Lane as the sort of vocal player and singer. They famously just come apart. They disband, and then they reassemble. And so the Moody Blues are one thing in their inception, but then past that, they are something quite else. And so anyway, I think an interesting band, and I dare say maybe even an important band, but there you have The Story in Your Eyes at number 33.
George Martin agrees with you. He thinks they're a very important band, thinks they did not get nearly enough credit. Maybe we should mention that their biggest hit in America was, I think, Nights in White Satin.
If that's right.
And I think if you hear a song by Justin Hayward, it's a song by Justin Hayward, right? He has some very characteristic sort of things where just automatically recognize what it is. His vocals being among them, of course. He sings his own material. I think that's
definitely right.
This is definitely a Justin Hayward song that you hear it immediately.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The Moody's had three vocalists. You have Ray Thomas, you have John Lodge, and you have Justin Hayward. And there was quite a bit of talent and versatility within the group. It's I do think they're a little underappreciated. I think Martin's point is a fair one. So there you have them at 33, A Story in Your Eyes. The last song we wanted to mention today it's a country song. It's a kind of a modest kind of crossover song for a guy by the name of Tom T. Hall. And the song is the year Clayton Delaney died. And I just wanted to just take a moment and just mention Tom T. Hall, who just passed away a few weeks ago. Tom T. Hall was a country singer of note. He put a number of songs, 21 songs, in fact, in the country top 10. And 7 of them reached the number 1 spot on the country charts. I suppose for pop listeners, he is probably best known as the writer of the song Harper Valley PTA, the Jeannie C. Riley hit. But he is, I think, considered by people who in the songwriting community as a sort of songwriter. He's in the Songwriters Hall of Fame. His songs are personal, they are emotional, sometimes incredibly honest. He's nicknamed the Storyteller. And his songs are, sometimes a kind of almost outpouring of emotion. It's really one of the famous songs that he wrote is a song from 1965, and I think the year matters. And it's the song called Hello Vietnam, which is a pro-Vietnam War song, which is featured prominently in Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. I would just add that Hello Vietnam was written in 1965. And when there was still a lot of pro-Vietnam War sentiment across the country. I'm not certain that Tom T. Hall would have written the same kind of song, say in 1968 or 1971. Perhaps he would have, but he was, a massively influential figure in country music, and someone who made a difference in terms of the songwriting craft in the 1970s in particular. And he's definitely worthy of mention here. But those are the songs from mid-October 1971. And so, Dave, you got some thoughts here as we make our...
I thought about the last song. I had never heard it before, but then I listened to it when I saw that it was going to be on our list. It reminded me a lot of the ballad of Lester
Flatt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From the Leonard Skinner. Just the same idea.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. The Skinner. Yes. Yes. I know what you're saying. Right.
And just the idea. Here was a guy, he played guitar, wasn't appreciated as a person in his community as much as maybe should have been, but he inspired me. And I just looked up to him and admired him and became a musician because he.
This is, yes, it's classic Tom T. Hall, who these nuggets that, individuals or sort of episodes that are influential, he recounts them, oftentimes in a different, a voice of a, different kind of persona or whatever, but he recounts them in a very kind of emotional way. They're sometimes very unflinchingly honest. He is definitely worth a deep dive, even if you're not a country music fan. The music of Tom T. Hall, his songwriting, there's a kind of poignancy to it that is just, you don't come across that every day. This is fabulous songwriting. So, Dave, take us home. What do we need to know about this Stephen Daves? Where can people subscribe?
If you enjoyed this episode, and we hope you did, you can see some more. Subscribe to Stephen Daves right here. You can see other videos of this sort, the 50 years ago this month, right up here. And our playlist, very important for this month, you can view by tipping right here.
All right. Thanks again. So Stephen Daves are also on Twitter, Stephen Daves1. So look for us on Twitter, and we'll see you next month. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.